right, good afternoon, folks. I'm sure more people will continue to join us, but I figure we'll get a start. I will introduce myself again in a little bit, but my name is Sandy Johnston. I'm a transportation planner with the Boston Region MPO, and among other things, I manage this transit working group, which is sponsoring our coffee chat today. We're joined by Pat Greenfield and Karitza Holdscomb from the Transit Workforce Center. We're very excited for this session, and I think we'll just launch right into it. I do want to personally apologize for sounding hoarse. I've had a cold. I'm doing a little bit better now, but still a little bit under the weather. So Matt, would you like to run through introductions and guidelines?
Sure, that works for me. Welcome everybody. I'm just going to go through the guidelines here. All participants will join this meeting with muted microphones. If you could rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation, should you have one, that would be great. To participate in the discussion, you can select the raise hand function. Depending on the version of Zoom you have, this may be found in a few different locations. It may be at the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. It may be under the reactions button found at the bottom of your screen. And if you don't see it in either of those places, try clicking on the participants button, also on that toolbar, and it will open a window where raise hand may be at the bottom. If you are on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. And if you have any technical difficulties, you can contact me, Matt Archer, via the chat box at marcher@ctps.org or by calling 857-702-3708. And with that, yes, also, I'm just going to read the accessibility statement. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards. Web content accessibility guidelines level 2, sorry, just having a slight screen problem. Guidelines level 2.1 level AA standards and revised section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate in this meeting, please contact me, Matt Archer, via the chat box at marcher@ctps.org or at 857-702-3708. So with that, we can go through introductions. So I will introduce myself first. I am Matt Archer. I'm a transportation planner at the Boston Region MPO, and I use he, him, his pronouns. And I'm just going to go down the list here. Pat?
Excuse me, Pat Greenfield from the International Transportation Learning Center and the Transit Workforce Center, Senior Director for Workforce Education.
Thank you, Pat. Karitza?
My name is Karitza Holdscomb. I'm also with the International Transportation Learning Center that runs the Transit Workforce Center. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and my position is Senior Policy Analyst.
Thank you, Karitza. Sandy?
Good afternoon, everybody. Sandy Johnson, Senior Transportation Planner with the staff of the Boston Region MPO, he, him, his, and I manage the Transit Working Group.
Thank you, Sandy. Ellie?
Apologies if it's a little hard to hear me. I'm actually on the train right now. But Ellie McCarthy, MassDOT Rail and Transit Division. I am the manager of transit programs and analysis, and she, her pronouns.
Thank you, Ellie. Franny?
Hi, Franny Osmond. I'm a transit advocate from Acton, involved in various regional groups and local. Thank you. And I'll be home in a few minutes, and then I'll be better.
Okay, thank you, Franny. Glenn?
Hi, everyone. Glenn Geiler. I'm the grants manager for Brockton Area Transit Authority.
Thank you so much, Glenn. Jeff?
Hi, I'm Jeff Bennett. I'm the Senior Shuttle Services Manager at 128 Business Council in Waltham.
Thank you, Jeff. Jonathan?
Hello, my name is Jonathan Ahn. I'm with Metro Transit based in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota, trying to listen about the operator shortage issue that's affecting nationally and see how other regions are handling it. Here to listen and learn. My title is Operations Manager for BRT. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. Lisa?
Hi, I'm Lisa Weber. I'm the Transportation Compliance and Quality Assurance Coordinator at the Human Service Transportation Office.
Thank you, Lisa. Melissa?
Hello, Melissa Dulé. I am Senior Director of Service Planning for the MBTA. She, her.
Thank you, Melissa. Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Fichtenbaum with Mass Mobility, and you can use she and her for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Rachel. Shayna.
Hi, Shayna Gleason, she, her pronouns, and I'm with the UMass Boston Gerontology Institute.
Awesome. Thanks, Shayna. Stella.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stella. I use she, her pronouns, and the Public Outreach Coordinator at the MPO.
Thank you, Stella. Tyler. Maybe we can circle back. And I do see that we have a phone number here, 978-314-9070. I will try to unmute you now.
Hi, it's Connie Mellis. I'm a transit planner at the Central Mass Regional Planning Commission.
Thank you so much, Connie. And I'm just going to try one more time for Tyler. Well, that's most of the introductions handled, so I think we can probably move on to the next item. Sandy, would you like to cue this up?
Yeah, sure. So I would like to just express my thanks to our guests from the Transit Workforce Center for very promptly responding to my request for information. And they got back to me within 24 hours about when I expressed my interest in bringing folks in. And as many of you know, we had a coffee chat on this topic of addressing the shortfall in driver recruitment. I don't like calling it a driver shortage. So I think it's a little bit more complex than that. Back in November or December, that was a really, really good discussion. And you all who participated in that had strongly expressed the feeling that we should bring in some people who really knew what they were talking about this topic, which I do not necessarily. And I'm happy to be able to facilitate this conversation with real experts. So Chris and Pat, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Sandy. Again, Pat Greenfield, and I forgot to mention she, her pronouns. And thanks so much for inviting us today. We're really looking forward to actually having a dialogue. I know Sandy referred to us as experts, and while in our years of operating the International Transportation Learning Center, which now operates the Transit Workforce Center, we do have a lot of background experience, but I think no one would be surprised to know that we don't have the answers to the driver recruitment issues. But what we do want to do is talk to you about some of what we've been looking at and really hear from you and engage in a dialogue. So with that, Matt, if you can advance the slide. So that's great. Perfect. So basically, as Karitza mentioned, the ITLC, which has been around for over 2 decades, now operates the Transit Workforce Center. And we were really excited to be able to get off the ground with this last September, where the Federal Transit Administration's first ever National Technical Assistance Center focused on workforce development specifically, with an emphasis on a lot of the areas we work in are the frontline workforce. And basically, our mission is to help urban, suburban, tribal, and rural public transportation entities and their various partners recruit, train, hire, and retain the diverse workforce needed now and in the future. So that's what we do, and we're just past our initial 6 months. So I'll hand the next slide over to Karitza. We'll talk to you about just a couple of our initiatives, and we can answer more questions as we go.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. So ATTAIN, which stands for the American Transit Training and Apprenticeship Innovators Network, is a peer network designed by the TWC as a way to provide information on apprenticeship and provide technical assistance in implementing a program. Primarily, ATTAIN is a network that connects agencies interested in starting an apprenticeship program with those that have an established program. Attain provides an opportunity for mutual learning and sharing of experiences, opportunities, and challenges. And there are several reasons why we're particularly excited about this initiative and why I'm bringing it up today. First of all, for bus operator apprenticeship in particular, this is exciting. Operator apprenticeship, which has at its core a mentoring program, is a relatively new idea and very relevant in light of the difficulties in hiring and retaining operators. We speak with many agencies across the country, and this is the common issue. But we have several examples of very successful apprenticeship programs that have shown that the industry can improve both retention and recruitment through apprenticeship programs. Attain is also the first time that the FTA and DOT have officially supported apprenticeship activity in transit. So that's a really new and exciting development for us. And if you'd like to join the Attain group and conversation, we'll provide a link in the chat if possible. And you can go to the next slide, Matt. So in addition to Attain, the TWC offers a host of services centered around providing technical assistance to transit agencies on workforce issues. You can see some examples of those services on this slide. And I'll turn it back over to Pat for some prompts to lead our discussion this afternoon.
Okay, thanks, Garitza. So Matt, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So as we know, we work closely. We basically are the Federal Transit Administration's agent in the field. I'm working with agencies and partners on frontline transit issues. One of the areas, the FTA, like us, like everyone, all of you, have been hearing about the critical shortage of drivers, but then when we started holding some focus groups and talking to people, it seemed very clear that agencies following quite close behind were agencies with critical shortages of technicians. In fact, there's, there are several aspects to this. One, I would just parenthetically note, and Karitza, at some point we can put this in the chat, for any of you transitioning to, for instance, battery electric buses, or you probably know about the low, no emission grants that are put out there by FTA. We do have materials on our website that give you information about the workforce development aspects of getting a workforce ready for this transition. We didn't make this a main focus because we cannot give direct advice. That's for FTA staff to do. But we do want you to know that there are resources there on how to integrate good workforce development into any fleet transition plan. And there is funding in the bill. Part of the funding must go for workforce development. So having said that, you have to have a workforce to develop. And we understand that these the recruitment has been a tremendous challenge, exacerbated by so many factors, including COVID. We have just started putting together the pieces of what would be a national campaign with a toolkit, materials within a toolkit that local agencies around the country can customize and use to do outreach. We would have best practices. We would have strategies on examples of programs that have worked. And we've been asking, we don't have all this knowledge perfectly in our heads. We've been hearing from everyone, and we do know this area. We've been working in this area, but you may have questions for us and comments for us, but we would very much like to hear from you in the course of the discussion. If you were going to get materials that would help you on outreach, who are your target audiences, do you think? What are the types of media? What have you learned are the most effective messages, or what's not working? Successful strategies and practices, things you feel are challenges, and other ideas and considerations. Because in the longer run, we want to make sure that the toolkit we put out is going to be helpful to you all. So those are some of our questions for you, but this is also your meeting. So I guess the only thing I do is, Matt, you can show the last slide, and then we can probably go off screen share. I assume all this will be available. You can sign up for our mailing list. We have different newsletters updating on events we're holding, on materials we have. There are ways for you to contact us. We're just building our new website now. We have some of our resources. It'll be fully launched, I think, right at the end of this month, right, Caritza? Right.
That is correct, Pat.
Right. So
that link is already live. You can click on it and access the website and find our email address and phone number. But the full website will, yes, be launched at the end of this month.
And the full website will have a number of materials, resources, links that we hope will be helpful to you. So with that, we'd love to have a discussion with you.
Yeah, thank you. I think I would suggest that we keep the slide with the discussion questions up for the discussion. But I would just, I think we have some questions that were submitted through the registration form, but let's start with these prompts. And if folks would like to speak to what Pat and Caritza just shared, to these prompts, and then hopefully later we'll get to some of those questions that you all submitted as part of the registration. So I will call on folks. You can raise your hand or you can just unmute yourself. Not a huge crowd. We can be pretty informal.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody has anything to say?
And Sandy, if it's easier to start with the questions people sent in, we can start that way. But no, I see Shana. Yeah.
I'm happy to throw something out there to start. So I did a study over last summer where I interviewed a bunch of different paratransit providers. And one of the obstacles that they talked about in terms of both hiring and retention was actually drug testing, and that this is becoming an increasing problem, which isn't something I had seen much actually in the academic literature up to that point. And there were kind of mixed opinions about it. Some people just sort of said, well, that population isn't for us. And others were saying, I just wish they were working harder to maybe differentiate between marijuana use to figure out if you're under the influence or, versus other kinds of drugs. So I'm just curious kind of what your take on that is. Like, do you see this getting to be more of a problem as it's, to say as marijuana is legalized in more states? Is there like a path out of this? I'm just kind of curious if you have any reactions to that.
I will just add that I have heard this is a major issue both locally and nationally.
Well, and we have also, and Caritza, maybe I know you can start with it. I think we were both going to refer to the same meeting we were at. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so as an organization, we aren't working specifically on this issue, but we know that our partner organizations are, and they are working on finding a way kind of around the legislation that makes it so that hiring people with marijuana that comes up on a drug test impossible. And I think, depending on the region, this is a huge issue for agencies where marijuana is maybe, not even seen as a drug. But, for the purposes of driving a transit vehicle, it's, completely out of the question.
Mm-hmm. The one of the organizations Caritza referred to, and some of you may be members or may know about them, is CTAA, the Community Transportation Association of America. And this is one of the items that Caritza and I were at their meeting about 6 months ago, Caritza, I think, and they, in their open question session, and this was a national group, hundreds of folks, and Shane, exactly what you're saying, was the issue. They said, this is a huge problem for us. If you want us to hire, they said, please, and CTAA, I know, is trying to deal with FTA on this. One of the things I should make clear, since we are chosen by the FTA as its workforce center, we, for instance, can't do lobbying or advocacy, but we can use the information. This is why we work with a lot of partners. So what you're saying is something that these partners have heard. Not surprisingly, the first person who stood up in a line of people saying this is a problem was from Colorado, where they find it almost impossible to hire people, especially because a lot of their drivers had been seasonal during the holiday season, the winter season, and people would come to ski, and they loved the fact that recreational marijuana was legal, and they'd also drive buses in this busy period. They can't meet the need anymore. So I sat next to someone at the meeting who had to fire a long time, one of the best longtime drivers she had. She said it broke her heart because he had happened to be at a party. You know, he thought he was okay. A few days later, he wasn't. And so the short answer is this is absolutely national. It is absolutely on the list of several key advocacy organizations. And I think if it's something you're writing up or you've found, I think the more that the CTAA and other groups hear about this, the more they can potentially do. So if there's, you know, we can give you information on either how to pass it on or we can, but absolutely right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that very thorough report. And this is just, I mean, I will just say from my personal experience in talking to transit professionals around the country, this just keeps coming up and keeps coming up and keeps coming up. And in many places, as in Colorado, agencies are finding it literally impossible to hire people.
Absolutely.
So I'll just throw out one of the questions that was submitted through the registration form. And I'm going to smush together a couple of those questions. And this kind of goes to the targeted audience for outreach question that you guys have on the slide here. Got a couple of questions about targeting for recruitment, people with disabilities, people returning, it says returning citizens. I imagine that means people who have been overseas, and targeting those populations relative to increasing pay or bonuses. And then, yeah, so I'll stop there. Are there any particular populations that have been fruitful in anyone's experience to target for outreach?
Well, let me actually, two of these you've mentioned, we've had discussions, and we'll come back around to the increasing pay and bonuses and what we've heard on that. Let me start with returning citizens. I think the way we've heard it, Sandy, are formerly incarcerated folks.
That makes much more sense. Okay.
Yeah, if I'm getting that term correctly. And in fact, that is one of the groups that we are looking into in this national recruitment campaign. Now, one of the issues, and this is often state by state and agency by agency, as folks know, I think, and we'd love to hear your experience, but there are sometimes statewide policies or agency-wide policies that bump people off, you know, the applicant list if they have a record at all. We've seen differences around the country, but we know that this is an obstacle in a number of places. And one of the interesting things in some of the focus groups we've had, have been transit CEOs really talking to each other about what structural obstacles do we have here that we have to address. You know, we all know there's an employment shortage, and it's not just in transit, it's across the board, but what are some of the structural obstacles we have to look at? One of them can be these rules around returning citizens. So that's the one area. Another area that we have just started looking into, and I'd love to hear from folks on the area of a range of disabilities. There have been some really interesting programs in particular places targeting folks. We actually have on our list has been work with, and I think I may have seen someone here, but maybe I'm remembering an early meeting from the National Mobility Center, that basically talking to people who really know about how jobs can be, where people have run into obstacles and where jobs can be adjusted and appropriate accommodations afforded, so that there is not just, again, people just saying, you can't do this, you can't do this. So this is one area we've started looking into in terms of employment, because most of the disability, going back to Shana's point about literature, most of the disability literature we've seen so far in terms of the community has been rider access. It's focused on rider access and not employment access. So we're trying to shift that so that we really start looking at employment access. So those are those two areas. We have pay and bonuses, but Caritza, do you have comments about those two areas before I move on to that?
No, I would just add kind of another target audience, which is veterans. We've talked to many agencies who've had really great success in recruiting from that population, both for operations positions and also for mechanic positions.
And the other thing about it, thanks for mentioning that, because I was looking at the list you have, but the three groups we were talking about, one is what we just call the general public, how you put your messages out to the general public about these careers. But Caritza's right. I mean, veterans, we're looking at, a number of agencies have had success in recruiting veterans, and there are packages of benefits that veterans can access in hiring if you hire veterans. So we're looking at that. The other group that we're looking at in terms of targeting, and we understand that that it has to be for an agency that has an entry pathway, is starting to look at younger folks in the community and folks coming out of high school and community colleges, and looking and basically making sure that people in the community, but particularly younger people in the community, are aware of these careers. At least they do see drivers, so they know that's a career. Technicians, they tend not to see and even know they're there. People don't understand necessarily the opportunities and the benefits of the job. So the earlier you reach out to people to make sure that they know that these are not just job, but career opportunities. That can absolutely, those are one of the groups we're looking at. I don't know if people have any more points on target audiences, because I think the issue of incentives, pay bonuses, increasing pay and bonuses.
I would suggest pausing here to talk about target audiences and see if anybody has anything they'd like to share. I don't know if any of our local transit operators have had any success or any stories they'd like to pass on, or any failures, honestly, along any of these axes, or if there's any populations that we think folks should be thinking about that haven't been mentioned. Rachel says in the chat, very excited to see what you come up with in terms of recruiting people with disabilities as drivers and other groups as well.
Mm-hmm. And actually, Rachel and anyone who, I mean, we're open to talking to anyone and everyone with expertise, but Rachel, this is one of the areas, if, you know, clearly you've been working in this area, we'd love to follow up and get, you know, more of a sense of what the feasibility is, what the obstacles are in your thinking, because it would be great.
I don't know that I have much information for you at this point, but I can certainly reach out to some stakeholders in Massachusetts and pass along anything I get or any good contacts who would be useful.
That'd be terrific. That'd be terrific. Thank you.
Rachel knows everybody. Great person to talk about this.
Those are the people, we like talking to people who know everyone. That's tremendously helpful for us.
Any other experiences that people want to share about, you know, success in reaching some of these audiences, or others that we haven't mentioned?
So I guess if should we move on, Sandy, to the other? You know, we can come back around to this anytime. So, so let me talk about, and Karitza has a lot of knowledge in these areas, and Karitza, I think I'll also will transition over to talking a little about mentoring also as incentives. Let me talk first. You know, we've heard mixed, interestingly, some mixed results on bonuses from agencies across the country. And we're not sure there is enough data yet for a pattern. Some have found it's great, people jump at it. Some have found it hasn't made much difference at all, especially depending on the market you're in, given the general employment that challenges, workforce challenges right now. There are a lot of places offering signing bonuses. So mixed results on signing bonuses. I will say that the general rule, and sorry if this sounds very simple-minded, but increasing pay always helps. You know, and quite frankly, I think I can well, I won't name him, but one of the leaders of the major management organizations we work with has said when he has agencies come to him and say, I can't hire people. And he says, what, you know, to be a bus driver. And he says, what do you pay? And they say $12.50 an hour. His answer is, well, then I don't have to tell you what your recruitment problem is. Because these days in this market, you know, people can go to Target often and get $15 an hour. And there are just a lot of competitors out there. So the general rule is increased pay helps. Does it take care of the issue? No, because there are a lot of high paid agencies where there are still challenges hiring folks. One of the areas we do a lot of work in is setting up for both operators and technicians. And this is going back to Karitza was talking about Attain, this is our Attain program, helping people to set up apprenticeship programs. One of the reasons we do this is the way to attract people in to jobs is for people to know that they have a future. And part of a future is that they have a career ladder they can move up in, that they can develop, they can be trained, they can learn, they can move step by step. I spent years working with the building trades where you have very established programs of advancement, of training and advancement. And that is one of the things that attracts people to the trades. There are agencies that have a history of this with technicians, with operators, with bus operators, bus drivers. This is much newer. At the core, whether or not you have a formal apprenticeship program, at the core of both of these is a really robust system of mentoring within the agency. And let me hand that over to Caritza to talk about.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. So like Pat said, the main, core of the apprenticeship program for operators is a mentorship, a relationship. Agencies will pair a new operator with somebody who's been down the road, who's been there, who's a seasoned operator, who can, teach practical skills, but also those things that come up in daily life, in the routine of the job, that an agency is not equipped to train in. The agency teaches, how to maneuver the bus, how to, basically comply with all of the policies that the transit agency has. But when you're out dealing with the public, that's where the mentor really comes into play, in providing advice and practical solutions for issues that come up on the job. And we've heard from agencies that have these kinds of programs who have seen, drastic jumps in their retention. And, not only that, but this serves as a recruitment tool too, because the apprenticeship program really lifts up the occupation of operator into a more professional light. Apprenticeships are, I don't know if prestigious is the right word, but they have more of a status, I think, than other programs. And in some cases, they may also come with a certificate from higher education. And all of these aspects kind of serve to, uplift operators, give them a support system, and make them feel valued.
And so let me just, one thing to follow up on Caritza, and just one other specific thing I'll mention, then, that people may have questions, comments, and feel free to push back on anything we're saying also. But as Caritza said, the mentoring is critical because almost every, and it doesn't matter, large agency, small agency, we've worked them all over the country, the basic driver training is technical. It's mechanical, like Caritza said, it's handling the bus. And most drivers we've talked to, most operators we've talked to have said, ultimately, the real challenge in this job, and if they're driven away from the job, or if they're scared off from the job, it's because of things like the potential for conflict, among passengers. So one of the aspects of a good mentoring program is de-escalation training. It's basic, it's customer service plus. It's how you deal with the public, but also real skills in how to deal with conflict, in how to relate to different communities during the day at different times of the day, what to expect. And also, as Caritza said, just having a person you're paired with, a more senior person who's ideally been trained to do this and does it very well, really sort of being a sounding board. So there's someone to go to.
And just as one other note, for the agencies that have these programs, generally the operator mentors are volunteer positions, and they are they submit an application and are selected by the agency. Also, an important component of these programs is that there is a very strong labor voice that really makes these programs, employee run, basically.
And the examples of mentoring and apprenticeship programs we have with technicians, but I'd focus, my sense is your focus here is on operators, is there are also some very productive partnerships with local community colleges where some of the training is done between the colleges and the agencies. There are a lot of local colleges that have really good courses, for instance, on customer service, on dealing with difficult people, psychology types of things in a very practical way. And we have examples of programs, we can show you, not a huge number around the country, but they're really starting to grow. We're seeing an explosion in interest. And the other thing is, if you're talking about recruitment, if you have a partnership, training, mentoring, apprenticeship, whatever you end up setting up program with the community college, another attractive area of recruitment is that if you set the program up the right way, once people finish their training, they also have some college credit in their back pocket, which can be, very much perceived as a benefit when you reach out to folks to say, what do I get here? I'll stop there for a minute. There was another thing that I wanted to mention that we've heard from agencies, but we've thrown a lot out there.
Yeah, Franny, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering, and I might have totally missed this, so just allow me that. In Massachusetts, are our recruitment efforts in sync and in full communication with our workforce development offices?
My understanding is that it's kind of a developing effort. Maybe some of our agency folks can speak to that a little bit more if you've had significant contact with economic development people.
Or the career centers,
Workforce development, I should say,
Yeah.
not economic development, yeah.
Right. Yeah. While people are thinking if they have an answer, let me just say that we've worked with agencies around the country on doing these outreach programs, and your question, I think, is a critical one, because we're finding the most successful outreach and recruitment programs are when there's a partnership at minimum with the local workforce development boards or the community, career centers, whichever different, areas have different. There's a comprehensive program in Cleveland that integrates locally based workforce development programs. They work with the city and state career centers. They work with Tri-C, Cuyahoga Community College on training and support. And what's also interesting, and this is something to think about, this is a program that's been going on for a while. It didn't happen overnight. Another interesting thing is they're working with employers from several different industries who are looking at the same potential pool of workforce pool. So their position is, instead of saying, well, we just want them all for us, the idea is if you reach out to a big group and you expand the pool and then give people enough information and support so they can make choices, you're going to be more successful in bringing people in. But your point about using the career centers and workforce development organizations, we found that's critical. And I saw something from Shana in the...
I wanted to add something, but do you want to look at Shana's?
Go ahead, Franny, and then we'll get to the article Shana posted.
It seemed, when I think about telling people, like I was telling a couple of people that were out of work recently, and I was telling them there's a driver shortage. First of all, I wasn't sure if I wanted to suggest to them that they talk to the school department or they talk to the private company that tends to do it, or they talk to the senior centers or whatever agency is running those, or the RTAs. And so that's one thought. And also, I realized that a lot of people might not feel comfortable driving a big vehicle, but the more we can have very small vehicles, even like MV1 style wheelchair vans, then I think the easier it would be to recruit people to drive those for the community transportation part.
And if I can just jump in for a moment, Ellie McCarthy had to drop off, but she emailed me with a couple of questions that are related to what you were just saying here, Franny. one, I'd be curious to know if you've heard of any agencies that have successfully adjusted their commercial driver license requirements to attract more potential drivers. If they, for example, lessened the requirements needed upon hire and then provided training or assistance in attaining the license. And then also, she'd be curious to know what some of the main competitors are that transit agencies are facing across the country, which is kind of a different way of looking at the same question Franny was just asking. School buses, trucking industry, other transit agencies.
So I don't think we have a good answer on the CDL requirements, because those are really put out by the FMCSA. I'm not sure if those can be lessened for these types of vehicles.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Pat. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to jump in. Probably, I agree that we don't have, there are national standards, and actually, and some of you may have run into this, that there also are some requirements on certified training centers that has created a lot more pressure for a lot of agencies. And I know that CTAA, among others, has been trying to work with FTA on that. The one thing I will say, while you can't right now, because that's at the legislative and agency, federal agency level, that's not something that can be easily shifted, although your input certainly will help. There are programs, and this actually goes back to Franny's point about workforce development. There are programs that have looked and said, okay, the CDL itself is an obstacle. I mean, if an agency is sitting there saying, we'd love to hire you once you get your CDL, or even once you get your CDL permit, which in some communities for, certainly young people, if not adult community members who don't have easy access to cars, that can be a problem. We worked with New York City Transit, and there are other places around the country I know do this, where they partnered with a South Bronx community development organization. And that organization got funding with another workforce development partner and with several other employers. And almost the entire program, along with soft skills for employment, was getting a group of 18 young people through the learner's permit CDL program, and then through the CDL itself, so that when they went to look for employment, they had that. But there are agencies, some agencies will do that internally. Karitza and I have been working on a tentative program in the DC area that would also help particularly both young people and people in targeted diverse and disadvantaged and underrepresented communities to both work on introducing them to the industry, working on certain soft skills that folks might need strengthening on, and also linking them up with a CDL training provider and finding funding to get them the CDL. So while Karitza's right, the requirement itself is at a much higher level, and the requirements around that, that's something to look at. And the other thing that Franny mentioned, of course, that you do have different rules if you're dealing with a van, for instance. So I just wanted to mention that. I think, yeah, Chris.
And Sandy, you said a couple other you had a couple other questions that you listed. I think one of them was on competitors to transit agencies, and I think that we know from talking with other agencies that Uber, Lyft, FedEx, UPS, all of the other driving employers are huge competitors. And the way to get around that is something that Pat mentioned earlier, is providing a competitive wage. I know Uber and Lyft are going to provide kind of more flexible hours, but at the end of the day, when you're looking at your income, the transit agency is always going to come out at the top.
The other thing I'd note, and this deals with that Kurtz is absolutely right. I'd also look at some of there are distinctions. I mean, you can say, okay, you can come work in transportation and you can do trucking and you can do Uber and Lyft and you can, do, but when we talk to long-term drivers, you talk about what they really value about the job. And when they go out into the community and talk to people about what they value, they very much, the people who stay, look at what they're doing as a fundamental community service. They talk about connecting people to jobs, getting people to their work, getting kids to school, getting people to their medical appointments. They're almost always people who enjoy, if they've been successful in their job and stayed in it, they enjoy interacting with groups of people. They feel like they are part of a community of service and a service that connects the community. And that is something, while you can probably make a whole lot more money, say as a truck driver, because that can be very competitive wage, even more, that's a very different type of work. I would argue that Uber and Lyft are also very different. So part of this also depends on how people really understand the role of transit as really the lifeblood of the community and connecting the community. And we found that the more the drivers who really love what they do go out into the community and talk about that has an impact also.
Your people are your best recruiters.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When we did those, you're right, Sandy, when we did some focus groups, the places that have had success with recruitment, they kept saying, get people's stories out. People, the people who can tell their story, that's what really brings people in. So you're absolutely right. And that's also, as Kurt said, that's the link to the frontline workforce. Having those folks out there talking to people, very important.
So I do want to thank Shayna for that article in the chat about new awards on workforce development. It's very interesting stuff in there. Recognizing that we have 5 minutes left in our scheduled time, is there anybody who'd like to share anything related to any of the topics that have come up here? If not, I have one more last question that was submitted in advance of the meeting I think might be interesting to talk about, but I want to give folks a chance to chime in. All right, well, I will throw in there, and this has been touched on a little bit, but we had a question about working conditions in relation to operations policy, kind of headway maintenance, scheduled breaks, layover lines. How does the quality of the work environment and the ability of the drivers, operators, other people working in the industry to have breaks and just a quality of life while they're working, does that make a difference in recruiting? My presumption would be that it would, but interested in any stories you have to share about that.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And this is why, I think I mentioned that we were in on the discussion with chief operating officers and chief executive officers of both small and large transit agencies. And they were saying, we need to look at, I mean, you have worker advocates and union folks saying, here are the things you need to fix. But also these CEOs were saying, we need to look at the things that are impacting the work environment. Certainly salary and benefits are important, but issues of whether you have good equipment out there. One of the things that got mentioned again and again was the problem of split shifts. If you're trying to bring someone in and you're saying to them, this is a fantastic job, we care about you, and by the way, you're going to drive from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. and then we'll see again, you know, from 3 to 8. I mean, there may be some people for whom that works really well. You're probably ruling out any parent, you know, who has primary responsibility for their child or children. And so, you know, one of the things that has been cited again and again is needing to look at split shifts and how you structure the job. So it's both what is the work environment physically, and also what are the work conditions. And that's certainly one of the ones that has come up big time, and on both the labor and management side.
Just something I would add, as a separate kind of project that the ITLC is working on. We've been looking at best practices in, you know, working conditions and the whole gamut of operator workforce management. But something that has come up as a best practice is, you know, for the agency to look at all of their routes and break them up to make sure that, you know, the operator has enough time between runs to have a meal, go to the bathroom, do away with split shifts so that, you know, they have a stable schedule. And one agency in particular has almost 200 routes, and they went through each and every one of them to make sure that operators wouldn't have, you know, 2 minutes to, you know, turnaround time when they get back to the station. They weren't working ridiculous split shifts like Pat mentioned. And that's been very successful for them.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so let's go to Franny and then we'll close up.
I just wanted to say that you're reminding me when you're talking about split shifts, et cetera, that having a warm, comfortable, pleasant place to be would be a great attraction. Hanging out, idling in the Dunkin' parking lot just doesn't seem ideal.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think folks who talk to drivers every day, you know, will hear these things. So none of these issues, I mean, some are easy to fix, some are not, but none of these are insurmountable issues. It's a matter of listening to the frontline workforce, seeing what works for them, what doesn't, and what has appealed to them, but what has also made them think, whoa, maybe I don't want to do this. And then looking at what can be changed and how it can be changed with a lot of input and partnership with the frontline workforce. I mean, that's critical.
I think that's a terrific message to end on. So thank you, Pat and Chris. This has been really fantastic. I know I have learned a lot, really appreciated it. And we will send out the slides, and the recording of the meeting will go on our YouTube channel. So we'll send that out after the meeting, hopefully within the next couple of days.
And Sandy, I know we have our general contact info, but please feel free to share with anyone, Coritz or my email, because we'd love to hear from people. I
was just going to put my email address in the chat. I just pressed enter too quickly, but hold on.
I'll do mine too.
I will share that as well. And we look forward to keeping up the dialogue, hopefully at some point in the future.
Great. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And Matt, if we could advance the last slide. So recognizing that it is 5 o'clock, I do appreciate everybody coming out. This is a great discussion. I just want to share a couple of upcoming things. Save the dates. I don't have a registration form for either of these yet. But April 27th, same time, 4 p.m., we're having a coffee chat on school transit, integrating school transit with other forms of transit and transportation. We are all about breaking down those silos, and that's going to be co-facilitated by Susan Barrett from the town of Lexington and Judy Shanley from Easter Seals. And then on May 31st, 1 to 2:30 or 3 o'clock, we're going to be having the quarterly transit working group meeting, the bigger event. We've got a couple of presentations, one from Ellie McCarthy, who was here earlier, and one again from Susan Barrett and the crew at 128 Business Council on their regionalization and mapping project, which is very exciting. So those things are coming up. I will be sending out emails to the working group email list with contact information and registration information when that's available. If you're not on the email list already, I will be adding you after this meeting because you registered. And my own contact email is at the bottom of the slide. Also, sjohnston@ctbs.org. I think you all know how to reach me. But are there any final questions? All right. Well, in that case, have a great night, everybody. And again, thank you, Pat and Kritza.
Thank you, Sandy, and thanks, folks. It's been fun.
Thanks.